Hello and welcome to another episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. Today I am absolutely delighted to have in the studio Nick Kerigan from Swift. Nick, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, no, great. Look, you made the trip down from Oxford. I know you're here down in town quite a lot as well.
Indeed.
We've been talking about this for a little while now. So to have you in here is brilliant. Thanks so much for making the trip.
Pleasure.
And looking forward to talking all things Swift and much more alongside it as well. So
Indeed.
Let's start off as we always do. Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll move on to Swift afterwards.
Great. Well, thank you for having me on the show here. It's great to be with you. So I'm Nick Kerigan. I'm Managing Director and Head of Innovation at Swift. So I lead a team of 10 who are keen and passionate innovators within Swift. I've been at Swift now something like 4.5 years. And before that, I had a 20-odd year career in payments and banking, most particularly focused in Barclays, where I spent 13 years doing strategy, digital payments, and then came into the innovation space.
Perfect. And I love the idea, and we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail later on, but the idea of 10 innovators is an exciting hub when you talk about that sort of thing. And I love the title of Head of Innovation as well, particularly in a company like Swift, which is such an establishment, isn't it? So well known all over the world. Yeah. But to see it sort of driving a team of innovators within a space there that's got so much opportunity within innovation as well, something which I'm really excited to talk to you about in a second as well. So whilst I said it there and gave it the sort of props of being a global, I guess, institution that everyone knows, assume we don't. Tell us a little bit about Swift.
Sure. So Swift is really the way that the world moves value. And across Swift, we see something like the equivalent to the world's GDP every 3 days or so. And we do that by connecting together 11,500 banks and corporates across 200 countries. So we are very much a global organization. We very much operate at scale, and we enable those banks and corporates to make cross-border payments and also settle securities transactions. So we're kind of a vital part of the financial infrastructure, if you like. And what's a bit unique about Swift is that we're also a global cooperative. So we're owned by our members, and we're seeking to serve that community of members with services, most particularly the network and the messaging that we provide to enable the transfer of value, but also with the other services that we provide around that to support a smooth customer experience.
And I think it's such an interesting space, isn't it, as you say, and there's so much opportunity within that. There's been so much evolution within the whole. I mean, you talked there about 25 years worth of experience within the payment space. Right. It feels like we're over the last maybe 4 or 5 years in particular, we're at this sort of almost game-changing sort of time of I guess the evolution of cross-border payments within the area. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the space, what's happening in it at the moment right now.
Well, payments overall is undergoing a transformation, and cross-border payments is no exception to that. And I think what fundamentally drives that is actually a change in the way that we live our lives, because everything in our lives is becoming digital, right? And therefore the economy has to become digital as well. And therefore being able to digitize the end-to-end payment experience is really fundamental. And with digitization brings an increase in the expectations that we have for things to be instant, to be frictionless, right? Things to just happen, things to happen securely as well. So things that make sure that they don't go wrong, that it's resilient. And so we're seeing all of those expectations come into the cross-border payment space. And Swift, together with the financial community that we support, has really been driving change in that cross-border payments space. So now something like 90% of the cross-border payments that we see across Swift reach the beneficiary bank within 1 hour.
Wow.
So it's a much faster experience than it used to be. It's a much smoother experience. And we're also, along with that speed, really focused on ensuring that it's a really reliable and resilient experience. So our kind of number one priority at Swift is what we call operational resilience, and that means that you can be sure that your payment makes it to wherever you're trying to send it. And we operate at something that we call 4 nines, so that means 99.99% uptime. So that we're ensuring that there is a guarantee there that you're in a confidence that you're going to make that payment end to end.
Isn't that fascinating that when you talk about the digitisation of the space and our, well, just of humanity actually,
yes.
and everyone's expectations increasing. I always talk about it quite a lot on this show, that the phone has completely changed how
yes.
we do everything, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
everything's on the phone.
So customer service, customer experience changes in enormous ways.
Right.
And when you think about, look, I think anyone who's got a bank account or done transfers will think of Swift and immediately by nature. So when we think of the traditional marketplace within financial organisations, we've seen all sorts of different types of banking. The retail banking
yeah.
structure has changed completely.
Yeah. Banking
across every single sector, technology has driven change within that. When you think traditionally of companies like Swift, those behemoths of the industry, it's quite often that those are the things where disruption comes in and they're there for the taking, and legacy becomes, the word legacy it starts to appear. It feels like you have avoided that sort of thing by talking about everything that you've just mentioned there. When you're talking about reducing friction, when you're talking about processes that would say, right, I've paid in America and it's going to come into your account in 3-4 days time, etc., etc. All of those, I think, is testament to what you guys have been able to achieve over that sort of time. How does that happen?
Well, it doesn't happen without considerable effort, right? Because you need to have a curious kind of mindset as an innovator to think, where is the world going to? It's that classic kind of Wayne Gretzky quote about, I always move to where the puck is moving, right? And it's having that kind of mindset. That's what we try and bring through our innovation team into Swift, and be constantly challenging ourselves to think, well, what is the direction and what's going to be the key trends that the financial community is going to need to respond to? Because with digitization, we're now seeing the emergence of digital currencies, digital assets, some of those really big trends, and we want to be focused in our innovation on what are going to be those most important trends for the future.
Because I think when you talk about the companies like Swift, there will be so many people there saying, right, I can do this better. And it usually then leads to these big fragmented sort of industries where lots of different people are biting chunks of the animal out.
Yes,
so to speak. And so people are saying, I can do this part of it better, I can do that part of it better. When you're a target, as a company like Swift would be, everyone's thinking, right, how can we improve this whole this situation? I love the fact that you guys are talking about saying, right, let's almost do that from within. Let's go in there and deal with it. I think it takes me back to when I first started working 25 years within the fintech space, and you've seen fintech become a term maybe 15, 20 years ago, whenever it was. The idea at that sort of stage was technology was a cost center behind financial services, right? And then it evolved into financial technology, and then fintech ultimately behind it. Now, fintech originally was like, we're going to disintermediate the banks, we're going to come in there, it's going to be a whole new banking infrastructure. And then what the institutions did was adapt to that, bring it in, they built innovation labs, they looked at various different pieces, and they embraced it rather than battled it.
Yes.
To me, it feels like that's an embracing of technology within the payment space that's required so much, as we've become more digital, so too is the need for the process to become more digital, payments behind it. Absolutely. And that seems something now which is just so seamless and got so much more, potential and opportunity to it at the same time, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I hope I'm very humble in this space, in the sense that I feel like we've come a long way, but we've still got quite a long way to go. And the world is going to keep changing very, very fast, and we really need to be able to
now as well.
Even faster. We need to be able to successfully adapt to that. We need to ensure that the financial community as a whole adapts to that, because you mentioned fragmentation. Fragmentation is something that's very high on our mind, because as new digital networks emerge merged carrying different digital assets or digital currencies, there's a real risk of fragmenting the global financial infrastructure. And so we've actually spent quite a lot of time over the last few years thinking about how do we make this financial infrastructure and community more connected as a result. And so that's where a lot of innovation focus has been, is actually connecting up these new networks, these new forms of value to themselves and to the existing payments and securities infrastructures.
I think that sort of collaboration aspect has been so important to the innovation that we've seen, or the progress that we've seen within the space, full stop. And actually, I mean, you've alluded to this so far as well, but I think innovation's a really interesting sort of area. And I mentioned before we came on air that Scott Bradley was on this show earlier last week. Scott was talking about his views of innovation, which he feels is a liberal term that gets thrown around a lot within technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I understood exactly where he's coming from, and he's written about this, and he's spoken about this, and he's been on panels about this, etc., etc. But his take is that in this space we talk about innovation a lot, but what we generally tend to see is just evolution of existing technology and existing work. And there is some game-changing sort of stuff that comes in at various different stages. And what he's talking about is moving into an area with his business that's doing something completely different in a new area. It's sort of reimagined the process of where we're going. So I want to talk about how Swift approaches innovation and whether the innovation is evolution, or how you disassociate that from the two, and what innovation really means and looks like in your world.
Yeah,
as a head of innovation.
As a head of innovation,
it's a cool title,
indeed.
Right?
It's a great title, but you have to do something with it. And we're pretty passionate about actually getting real things done together with our community. I tend to think of those sort of different flavours of innovation as sort of incremental, disruptive, and transformational, fundamentally. And when I think incremental innovation is important because you need to be able to deliver value quickly. A lot of that kind of innovation happens within the product teams at Swift, sometimes supported by the innovation teams, but we're not a centralizing function. So those product teams are open to innovate, and we will give them the tools and support to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Our innovation team's focus is more at the disruptive and transformational end of the scale, and in particular, as I mentioned earlier, what are the big trends that are coming down the line that we need to be able to respond to. The other, I think, hallmark of the kind of innovation that we do at Swift is that it's inherently collaborative. So the members of our financial community, the banks and corporates, will fiercely compete with each other, as well they should, to better serve their customers. And that's not the space in which we operate with our innovation team, because we don't create solutions for only one organisation. But what we're really focused in on are what are the key trends and the key challenges that we need to solve together as an industry. And the beauty of being part of Swift in that is that often what will happen is that members of our community will approach us and say, look, we think this is a challenge that's better solved together and solved across an industry, not by 11,500 banks and corporates individually. And so that's the kind of challenge that we like to take on, and to gather together members of our community who are passionate about that opportunity or that challenge, to be able to then look to, okay, how do we develop a solution to that? How do we successfully serve that or enable that? And we've seen that come together in a number of different spaces. For example, last year on CBDCs, we convened what was then one of the world's largest collaborations around digital currencies. So we had 38 financial institutions working together in what we called our Phase 2 sandbox. So we had 11 central banks, 25 commercial banks, 2 market infrastructures, all working together on looking at some quite deep use cases, and they were use cases that were quite complex, very commercially relevant, but they were also use cases that were chosen by that group. So we didn't choose them as Swift. They were use cases that were chosen by that group to say we want to go in and focus on those use cases and find a solution to those. So that's the kind of way of working that we really like to employ with our community.
I think that's a really interesting point on so many different levels. So that collaboration and community is something which we talk about a lot, and I think it's been the the catalyst for the innovation that we've seen in the space for, full stop over recent years, which is really encouraging to see, because I think it was so much cover your own homework within financial services for years. I think it was detrimental to the progress where other areas were utilising technology and moving far quicker in innovation than the financial services industry was. So I love the fact that that's coming into it. But that groupthink is a really interesting sort of thing, because I imagine, and no disrespect intended, but when you're talking to some of those institutions that you're talking about, there'll be some egos about wanting to be the loudest voice, the most important voice, or the smartest person in the room when you're talking through that. So to actually gather that sort of thought and to get that collaboration, that must be a really tricky thing to be able to do when you're talking about the scale of what you're talking about, to then be able to pull information out, which then becomes useful things to then move further forward. How do you manage that? How does that work?
You're right. That is a key challenge in running this kind of collaborative innovation. In particular, the CBDC sandbox I mentioned, that was a 6-month process, right? Quite an intense collaboration, getting together with, maybe 70 or 80 people on a call every week or 2 weeks, and going deep into some topics. So you have to have the skills in terms of being able to facilitate that kind of process. And also the ability to build trust and understanding within that kind of the group. And the beauty of that was that each of the institutions that came into this sandbox had done different kind of experimentations, different initiatives previously, and so they were all able to bring those perspectives. Also, because we aimed for a kind of broadly global coverage, to be able to then have institutions from across the world who've done different things in different markets to bring that experience in. And sometimes that's kind of the experience of here's something that works. Equally valuable is here's something that we tried that didn't work, but we avoid the dead end here, and at least we sort of ensure that we don't go off on a tangent or explore something that somebody's already figured out that hasn't worked. But then the question I think you're kind of getting to is, how do you build up that trust? And I'm a big fan of a book called The Right Kind of Crazy by a person called Adam Steltzner.
Okay.
And Adam Steltzner was the chief scientist at NASA.
Okay.
And he was responsible for the team that put the rover on Mars. And then he had a break from NASA and wrote this book called The Right Kind of Crazy. And I've heard him speak a couple of times, quite an inspiring speaker. But he talks in that about how to build trust amongst a group and try and get everybody to have this value of curiosity, which is what we try to instill in the collaboration we do with our community, but also the kind of value that we try to instill internally in Swift, which is to try and say, well, what's really the best solution to this challenge? And if you can build up trust amongst the people in that collaboration or in that team, then you can challenge each other. So you can then say, well, okay, this idea is good, but I think here's a better way of doing it. And so then you each kind of push each other to be able to get to a much better solution. And that's the kind of value I'm kind of quite passionate about.
And what builds that trust?
There's the understanding in that of what everybody is bringing to that. And then the ability to then bring out from people, what their contributions can be, and therefore you start to build mutual respect. I also think about in that group that it's really valuable, and this is a great thing about the Swift community as well, to have a diversity in that, particularly diversity of perspectives to bring to bear, and to therefore be able to kind of constructively challenge each other to get to a common goal.
I love that the concept of the right kind of crazy as well, because it brings together the thought process of thinking differently, of looking at things from a different perspective. And when you're talking about that, when you've got the ability for people to look at things from all sorts of different angles, that gives you the opportunity to find great solutions. And one of the things you've spoken about a couple of times now is the whole concept of tokenisation, everything that's happened in that sort of space. I know you've done a lot of work in there. I think probably it's something, particularly over the last 6 months, which is, and it works in cycles, but this show has a lot of conversation around digital assets, and the whole concept of tokenisation is something which we covered at various stages, and we've seen various different cycles. My view over the last couple of months in particular has been we've seen more and more noise around this sort of space. We've got a very, very pro-crypto government coming into the US. We're seeing more and more opportunities. We're seeing trust building within the arena.
Right.
And I think it's gone from something there which would be people had a skeptic view of, to saying, right, how do I position myself within this? So this is now, to me, the next phase of its evolution into something that will become very mainstream in the not too distant future. Talk to us about how Swift's interacting with that and what we're looking at.
Yeah. So like you, I mean, we see this as a trend that is accelerating, right? And there are some, quite substantial predictions for, how big the value of tokenization will be in quite a short time frame. Something like 30 trillion worth of assets by 2030. Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball onto whether those will come to...
There's a lot of people who wanted a crystal ball.
Yes, whether those will come to pass or not. But I think even if it's 10% of that, it's going to be a fairly substantial trend. Yeah. And what I think is kind of fascinating about this space is that, in principle, anything can be tokenized, right? We're talking at the moment about, digital assets, right? So tokenization of existing securities, bonds and shares, for example, and then moving into tokenization of assets that today are much more illiquid. The industry term real-world asset tokenization, which I'm not a fan of, but I guess that's what everybody uses, so it's better to use that parlance. So the ability to then make illiquid assets liquid through tokenization. But you can push that further, right? So you can think then about the tokenization of trade documents in a supply chain, which today is very much dependent on paper, right? And then you think about the tokenization also of money, hence digital currencies coming to play, because in order to transact in this space, it's not good enough just to have an asset. You need to also be able to pay for it, right?
Of course.
So what is commonly called delivery versus payment, and therefore you need to be able to have some form of money digitized, or at least connected to the digital ledger, in order to be able to make a transaction. And so you start then to see this picture of a world in which many things can be tokenized, and this becoming a kind of quite a prevalent kind of trend across many different parts of finance.
And it's exciting within the potential of that, isn't it? Because it does shift the narrative, it does shift the opportunity, it does shift the scale. Right. And as you talked, I smirked when you first started speaking about this, because you talked about even if it's 10%. And I've had a couple of conversations recently where people said, look, this is the potential of everything.
Yes.
But even if it's 10% or 20% or 30%, whichever number you go with,
right,
the scalability of it is phenomenal, right?
Yes.
And that makes a fundamental change to the ecosystem that we've lived in for the last, we've talked about various different phases of fintech coming back to it. We talked about, and even the markets, the electronification of the markets and the big revolution within this. But when you're talking about AI, tokenization, even coming back to things which seem old hat now, like cloud, etc.
Yes.
We're talking about this sort of this perfect storm of things there that lean into this sort of innovator's mindset, don't they? And you look at this and you say, do you know what? I mean, it must just be, how do I tame myself down rather than think even bigger, because it's infinite, isn't it?
Yes. And that's both the opportunity of it and also the threat or actually the challenge of it, because. We've talked a little bit about fragmentation. Well, okay, all of these things are being tokenized. They're being tokenized onto new platforms. Yeah. Then the question is, okay, great, but they're on that platform. How do I connect it with the other platforms that are emerging? Yeah. How do I also connect it with payment systems if I need to be able to move the money against that? And that's the kind of role that we, as Swift, try to take in this space, because it's a very broad landscape, and so we have to focus where we think we can add our value. And our value, I think, is around what we call interoperability, which is just a long word for saying, how do you connect these things together in a really effective way so that we can support that market to be able to scale up?
Yeah. Well, interop, I think, has been such an important word of the last maybe 3-4 years in particular, as you're saying. legacy technology giving way to this, this surge of fragmented sort of businesses, as you say, and comes back to the whole concept of digitization in our day-to-day life, is we expect everything to be connected.
Yes.
And I think that to me is the great opportunity with interoperability. And there's some brilliant companies who I think are doing some great things that sort of align to low code, no code sort of things as well that come into it. It becomes a really interesting space to work in, doesn't it?
It does. It's a fascinating space to work in, and it's a space where that community that Swift has is asking us to support them in doing that, to support them in reducing fragmentation, to support them in connecting the new and the new, and both the new and the new and existing together, and to be able to do that with the connectivity they already have to Swift, but also to be able to then reach these new digital networks. And there are a number of ways that we can do that through APIs, through our own kind of solutions that we've created, and also through using protocols out there in the market. So, for example, we did a recent blockchain interoperability experiment where we worked with the Chainlink CCIP protocol, just as an example, so that we could be able to reach to public blockchains as well as private blockchains. So I think we will see a variety of options. I like to say, really, interoperability is hard but essential. And there's probably not going to be any one single solution to it. But we're aiming at with Swift to be able to be a bit of a convener of that community, to be able to say, look, this is how we can make these things work together, and then also this is how we can have standards in this space. And so we recently published a white paper around digital assets, looking at potential areas for standards, and we think that's going to be really important as we go forward. And obviously, Swift has had quite an extensive role in the standards space through being the standards authority for ISO 20022 in the payments space, and we're looking to kind of take that thinking about standards and bring that also into the area of digital and tokenized assets.
Well, I've hosted and moderated panels talking about building trust and restoring faith in digital assets.
Right.
And that, to me, is exactly where that comes into it, doesn't it? If you're having those sort of standards which are in there, if you're building trust within the space, that's the last frontier of its real adoption within to where it goes. And I think it's really interesting. As you've been talking, I've just been thinking about the sort of international, global aspects of what you were talking about, and the sort of thing of that. I think generationally and culturally, the sort of differences which you're talking about there. We talk about innovation in the space and digitalization. Forget that multi-generational people are looking at the banking system. So there are people there who don't, the underbanked, and people who don't have access to to the internet and what have you at the same sort of stage. It's so complex in terms of what you're looking at, which makes it such a fascinating space to go into. I want to sort of move into the sort of final area of this conversation, which is talking about your team.
Yes.
And the sort of 10 Swift innovators that you mentioned, this merry band who are changing the world right in front of us. Tell me a little bit about how you select those. You've been there 4.5 years, as you say. You've got into it. You seem to have a business there that absolutely backs innovation within it.
Very much so.
It sounds enormous fun. It sounds like an enormous challenge. It sounds like the biggest holy grail of technologists is being able to do cool things and solve complex problems. You're right at the very heart of that. So tell me a little bit about what it's like for you and the team to be working with the Swift Innovation team.
I mean, I guess the first thing to say is yes, there is strong backing for innovation,
which is so
Swift,
important, isn't
which
it?
comes from the top of the organisation, which is great. And we're also proud at Swift to be a global top 100 inspiring workplace to be in. So it's a really it's a really exciting and interesting place to work.
I can see it in every way you talk about.
I get very passionate about this, as you can really tell, right? I guess there's a few things about being in the Swift kind of innovation team, and also working to innovate in Swift more broadly, whether you're in our team or in another area of Swift, but equally innovating. And I think the first thing is you get to work on some of the the really important cutting edge trends that are coming up, and to be able to have that ability to look ahead, but also understand what the relevance of those trends are. And and sometimes that's not always easy, right? It's quite challenging, but it is really intellectually kind of stimulating and an exciting space to be. The second is, I think it's really important, both in our team but broadly across Swift, that we have a diverse group of people looking at these topics, because it's with that diversity that you actually get to be able to really get deep into those topics and bring lots of different perspectives together that ends up at a much better solution in the end. So it's a diverse team. In our team we have both the kind of what you might describe as more sort of business kind of focused professionals who are thinking about, okay, what should we do in here? How does this solve an industry challenge? How could it be sustaining? All of those things. And then also more technical colleagues who are looking at the technologies and, okay, how can we enable that?
And that fusion is so important.
And that fusion is absolutely very, very important. But we're deliberately, in terms of the size of team, constructed so that we have enough people in the team to get meaningful things done, but also that we're small enough that we force ourselves to collaborate internally with the rest of the organisation and then externally with our community as well. So we rarely think that we can actually solve things on our own. Much more often, we're sort of bringing people together in virtual teams to work with us to kind of to figure out an innovation.
And that must be great for the organisation itself to be able to get involved in those sort of things.
Right.
I love that sort of concept, to be almost too small to be able to think that you are the central hub of the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Which means that you ask questions. I speak to a lot of people who come through product backgrounds, and you mentioned it earlier on, the differentiation between product and the innovation team, etc. But having that sort of concept there, to me, of what makes a great product leader or a CPO or anything like that, is the absolute desire to get to the bottom of the problem by asking questions.
Absolutely.
And seeking that feedback. And when you've got a team there that's doing that, that's got that diversity of thought, that's got interesting and challenging problems, that's doing great things and changing an industry, that's a phenomenal position to be in, isn't it?
Yes, and it's a real, it's a privilege and an honour to be doing this kind of work, because you are looking across the whole of the financial services industry. We take a kind of almost like a horizontal view across those 11,500 banks and corporates, and so
it's big, isn't it?
It is big. It is big. But it's also collaborative, and that's kind of solving those really interesting and important trends and challenges. Doing that with a diverse team and looking across that whole community. Those are the sort of kind of ththings that get me out of bed in the morning and bring me to work.
And that's what you want, isn't it? I love talking to people on this show who are bouncing into the job which they're doing. I think there's too many people who just go and exist and do a job, rather than saying, right, what we're doing is important, what we're doing is significant, what we're doing is exciting and challenging, and gets that sort of thing going. So I love to see it. I've loved this conversation. Nick, for people who want to find out more about innovation or talk to you and reach out, I'm sure it's something which you're very happy talking to people about. Absolutely. If they want to understand more about Swift's approach to it, or what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So you can go onto swift.com. We have a sort of extensive set of information on our innovation and how we work, and then you can reach out to me either on LinkedIn or X. I'm very active on social media, as people might have seen, so you know where to find me there.
Absolutely. Nick, listen, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Great, thank you so much. Cheers, it's been great.
And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on the next episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.